All right, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Of Like Minds video podcast. Today I have a super special guest, Kevin Kane, the director of the Visual and Performing Arts Education Department over at UCLA, professor of arts education, and my former professor, has a special place in my heart. Kevin, thank you so much for coming on today. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, likewise. I'm so excited to spend some time with you.
And same. And Kevin, first, a lot happening in the world. I just want to check in with you. How are you doing today? I know that you're on campus and you're back in your original office. So kind of being back in that space. What's it like? How have you been today?
It's really great coming back to the UCLA campus. But to be honest, since I think I have this down exactly, since March 13th, I've only been back here like tops maybe 6 times, right? A half dozen times.
Wow.
Our classes immediately turned to remote classes. I think you know how this is working all throughout
Yeah.
our city and country and the world. But it was really a drastic switch. But I get very inspired by coming back here. That said,
Mm.
when you were a student at UCLA, let's see, what is there, like 45,000 undergrads and graduate students combined?
Yeah.
And then if you add in the tens of thousands of people who work here, it's a small little city and it's pretty empty.
Wow.
So this office of mine gives me a really, um, really great feelings of work that I've done here,
Yeah.
thinking I've done here, writing I've done here, but mostly the conversations I've had through office hours and with students. So I come back here. I try to come back once every week or once every 2 weeks now because I need some inspiration. About
Yeah.
10 months into a pandemic, like we got to keep finding new ways to kind of keep inspired and keep hopeful. And I like these surroundings. Also, by the way, super chill, sometimes even more chill than my home because because there's like literally no one here.
Yeah. Oh my God. Well, first of all, Kevin, I think that's an adjustment, especially, as an arts education educator myself, just the adjustment of working from home. And I think maybe what's that adjustment been like from you? We're in ways we're both very social creatures and we feed off of other people's energy. What's the adjustment been like for you during COVID?
Well, like I teach arts education at UCLA. I'm also though an active teacher. I'm working with
Hmm.
UCLA students, but I'm also still working with high school students in theater arts and
Yes.
movement and dance. I don't know if we can overstate how drastically different our teaching is when we're used to being in the same room, reading each other's eye contact, body language, movements, the way we teach. You're more of a dance educator than I am, but back in the day I did a lot of dance. But there's a lot of there's a lot of energy that passes back and forth from teacher to student and student to student.
Mm,
That's really hard to simulate in a Zoom classroom,
yeah.
and yet I've just been so impressed by my own kind of creativity and innovation, but really inspired by a lot of UCLA students who are, for better or worse, this is their time to be like a college student. This is their time to be studying their art form, visual arts or design, media, film, theater, dance, um, architecture. Like this is their time to sort of like lean into that, all that they've worked
Mm,
for. And so I think as teachers, we want to make that as as successful as
yeah.
possible. Um, I teach ninth graders currently
Hmm.
theater arts too. So it's in some ways my ninth grade classroom at the LA County High School for the Arts that I work with. It's like a laboratory for my UCLA classes to really sort of to like figure out, hey, what is it that's happening currently in arts education and in theater
Mm,
education that my students could benefit from, and my students are really leading me in a lot of ways. So I don't know. I
mm,
think I don't know if I answered your question, except to say that education and the arts have changed drastically since,
absolutely.
I'm not just trying to spin positive all the time, but I have
Mhm.
been impressed by some of the really incredible lesson plans, projects.
Mm,
Um, Everyone's gotten their like video editing skills up to point, or at least tried to, because so much of what we're doing, if we want to actually share it with others or showcase it, we have to, practice self-recording, like in our own
yeah.
spaces. and then maybe putting it together in a way that it looks like it's a group piece. And, you've
Yeah,
probably
yeah,
seen
yeah.
some, but there's some beautiful work being done. And, but I can't, like, I think I can't, you know, can't uh, wait to go back to the classroom. Really, is the truth. I want to, I want to see the students up close, the UCLA students, as well as any kind of community arts programs we're working with, after
Yeah.
school programs where families join us. A lot of us are, in our isolated spaces, and the arts are really helping us get through a tough time. But I think
Yeah.
a lot of us want to be back together.
Well, I did want to ask you, you were just speaking on that, Kevin, talking about how there's potential of, you're excited at the thoughts of even just coming back with having made, all these great adjustments during COVID, learning virtually, collaborating virtually. One, is there even any word on when do you think you'll get back to
Hmm.
being able to be in person? And two, do you think that that will cause another shift in terms of having to adjust being social again and being in bigger groups, and maybe just talking about like that potential, the challenges that will potentially face if you guys do get to come back in person?
That's kind of the question of the day, the week, the month, and we've been some ways asking it for like, maybe the whole time, which is like,
Mm.
hey, we're figuring out how to do this. Uh, some of it was a little bit like uh, uncoordinated or even a hot mess sometimes. But then we kind of got good at it. But I think we don't want to get so good at it that we don't like
Mm.
remember that, you know, the arts are capable of so many things in a child's life, in an individual's life, but
Yeah.
and in a society. But that I do think it requires us to be, courageous and brave and thinking about what have we learned from this last year? What
Yeah.
are some of the things that we've developed that maybe will never go away, right? Like they were good, like they were some good discoveries. That's almost like, I'm not obviously a scientist, but if you're thinking about the arts as a kind of subject that is worth investigating and doing
Mm.
research on and looking at, kind of the best ways, or the better ways to do it.
Mm.
Um, I think I use this quote. I think I hope I have it at least nearly correct from Michelle Obama's podcast, where the
Mm.
goal is not to come back the same way we were before. It's not going back to normal.
Mm.
I don't think we'll ever go back to that, but maybe we're going back to better. And that might even improve, going back to better to me means like taking what we've learned that really works and is really creative and is really kind of fun and exciting. But also, remembering some of the ways that we used to do things when we're in the same room, and we're kind of creating hybrid or
Yeah.
mixed ways of doing this. But to answer your question, I don't really know when we're coming back.
Yeah.
I'm not speaking on behalf of the university
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
LA Unified School District. Like I feel like that's beyond me to know exactly what that is. I'm not Dr. Fauci, but here's I wish I was as brilliant as, but but I will tell you what I think I hear and what I think I'm in touch with in terms of our UCLA students,
Mhm.
our instructors, professors, our community partners, the principals of schools. As you know, part of the wonderful thing about the VAPA program here at UCLA is it brings students like you were when you were an undergrad into classrooms and into schools
Yes.
to really work, with young folks, elementary school kids, middle school
Mm.
kids, high school kids, families. We're starting new programs working with the senior population, senior citizens. So,
Wow.
it's big, it's immense, the possibility for the arts to sort of help us understand who we are as human beings and how the world works and what could work better. But in terms of coming back together, I think I'm connecting it to how successful the vaccine is,
Mm.
how safe people feel. The teachers need to feel like they've gotten their, the vaccinations that protect them from, transmission.
Yes.
High density populations like UCLA, where you're bringing a lot of people together.
Yeah.
I don't think that. I think it's almost like instead of it, I'm using my hands. I don't know if your followers will see this, but I don't think it's going to look like this. Boom. I think it's
Mm.
going to look like like slowly
Yeah.
figuring out a way to come back and create this again, right? And I
Yes.
think that a lot of that depends on how safe our students feel, their parents. Some parents are not going to, feel super comfortable sending their kids right back into the kinds of classrooms that
Fair.
were, and a lot of public schools classrooms were. Oh, Kevin, back in the day, I used to teach theater and dance at John Marshall High School. Always,
Yes.
I have to give credit to this school.
Yes.
Um, but theater workshop was a class that developed it and evolved over the years. But by the end of me teaching in public school, I had 55, 60 kids in a room. I don't think we're
Mm.
going to rush back into like what would you call it, like overly enrolled or highly impacted
Yes.
classrooms. I think
Mm-hmm.
I think we're going to have to figure out a way as theater and dance artists to, maybe we're still going to teach with our masks on, or maybe we're still going to
Mm-hmm.
practice social distancing. And,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, but there's a long way around it. But my answer to you is I'm really looking forward to the fall 2021. So, like, let's say 6 more months, maybe we can really start to be like in spaces with each other again, and starting the healing process, right? Like we
Yeah.
are, our whole community, city, state, country, you know, world. I, I, I feel like we've, experienced a lot of trauma the last year.
Yeah.
Having to worry about the health and well-being of ourselves, our loved ones, our elders. So
Mm.
many of us experience loss or sickness. So many young people before their time are, grappling with like really existential life and death questions. And I just can only imagine the way the arts have always been a part of the solution in terms of processing and understanding. I think it will definitely be a part of the recovery and the healing process. I'm not telling my students this and my colleagues this, and I really try to believe it from my heart. I think the arts are going to be part of the recovery process, part of the healing process,
Absolutely.
part of the renaissance. Like we are going to like come from this moment and hopefully speak to it in the way that artists can speak to things, with color and nuance and shape and energy and texture and
Mm.
critiques and possible solutions for the future going forward.
Yeah.
Last year was a convergence of emergencies, the rise of consciousness around Black Lives Matter and
Yep.
social justice and inequalities. It wasn't just a pandemic, but it was a pandemic that was like, informed by so many different kinds of emergencies.
Yes.
A super volatile political situation. Artists have always been the people to talk about those things,
Mm.
but I think we all want to just maybe experience what it's like, to touch other human beings
Yeah.
and to touch them in terms of dance, like, think about social dancing, or
Yeah.
ballroom dancing, like literally to touch another body that's not a family member. Or even for some of us, we just want to get back to our elders and give our seniors a big hug and tell them how much we
Yeah.
love them and we miss them, or our little children that we don't get to see, and just really give them the hugs that, that give us energy and give them, a feeling of love in the world, but
Yeah.
also the way we can touch each other with our creative expression. So I'm really hoping that next when we bring back touch.
We're hoping, Kevin. And you
Yeah.
kind of alluded to it, and I've been saying this, I've been repeating this, and just obviously so thankful that I was able to experience UCLA, I think, to its fullest in terms of, you learn so much outside the classroom. And with outside the classroom, that also includes VAPA. And I think those in class, like being able to work at schools and being at Bancroft Middle School and Uni High, and I think you were there for a lot of that. That is such a huge part of the program that I feel so bad for the, I know
Yeah.
that you guys are making a lot of great adjustments. You're doing the best that you can, but just there's something to be said about those in-person experiences at the actual community and being in those school systems. If you can just talk about, how we obviously don't have that, but just that's going to be, I think is going to be such a huge hurdle. Cause for me, that was some of the best because Bancroft Middle School, as you know, you were
Yeah.
overlooking a lot of my work. It was, I always tell people like it's easier for me to teach now because I had like those middle schoolers were some of the toughest kids I've ever had to. And just because of they were in middle school and I had to understand human psychology and behavior and I had to figure out how do I fit into this equation. So if you can just give us, your thoughts on, the importance of, in class learning and being immersed in that environment. And then obviously having to adjust in the pandemic, not being able to do that. If you can just talk about those two things.
Well, yeah, I do think there's nothing like, and I actually relate to your experience. I started by teaching high school, but it's still sort of the same thing. Someone
Yeah.
basically opens a door for you. For me, I was a teacher
Hmm.
working on getting a teaching credential, but they literally gave me this wad of keys and said, okay, go teach this class. It's
Yeah.
like usually, usually the new teachers are like at
The
the
extra room
farthest
or
end of the
yeah.
camp, like in some bungalow somewhere,
Hmm.
like whatever. And you walk into the room and it's like a bunch of kids whose backs are to you and they kind of look at you and then they
Hmm.
go back to their covers. So, I had to experience that just like you did too. And I think
Yeah.
that's maybe like, the passage, rite of passage for teachers,
Yes.
but slowly making a difference in the way that the students respond to you, that they kind of care about the subject. There's nothing like that going on right now. Obviously, the
Yeah.
schools, even the full-time credentialed teachers haven't been back in the classroom in our state. Now, interestingly, my sister is a first grade teacher in
Mm.
Pennsylvania, and she's actually had different state. I think maybe arguably one of the problems with the way our country and our administrations have like sort of handled this pandemic is
Hmm.
there's different rules and there's different things going on
Yeah.
depending on state to state or county
Yep.
to county.
County to county. Yep.
But for California, we haven't really been back in the classroom since last March.
Mhm.
And a lot of students, I would say, the good news is they're sort of figured out how to learn on Zoom and kind of they're thriving to the best that they can. But there's
Yeah.
also a lot of students that have fallen through the cracks, Kevin. And that's what worries me about that scenario that
Yeah.
you're just talking about, which is that it's not only our UCLA students not having the opportunity to experience their teaching practice
Yeah.
um, and that's the beautiful thing about arts education for me and teaching artistry. It's like it values the arts and the deep training you had in dance and I had in theater and other people have in visual arts or in film, but it also values the educational and developmental process of the students. And
Mm.
we're trying to do it in a what I would say like a mediated way, like as I'm really loving like creating a vibe with you right now, but
Yeah.
we're not in the same room.
I know it's not the same.
And even when you were a graduate, this is off topic a little bit, but
Yeah.
you would come back and you would check in with
All the
me and
time. Yeah.
maybe others, but we've had some really wonderful conversations since you
Yes.
graduated. So
Yes.
those are some of the things that are missing from the way that we're, adjusting. But let's talk about the VAPA students. So
Mm.
they figured out ways to continue to do their lessons that are required of them in order to get a minor in arts education. So like
Hmm.
you, like a major,
Yes.
which is an art form. In your case, it was dance, a
Hmm.
minor in arts education. You put it together, it kind of, for a lot of students, that combination makes a lot of sense. But most of what you learned was kind of the experience of designing your lessons, practicing them on your peers here at
Mm.
UCLA campus, but
Yeah.
then actually going into classroom spaces and, trying them out. And some days were better than others, right? Like, but,
Yeah.
you go back to you go back to like your core belief that, you have something to offer these kids,
Mm.
something that, you learned yourself at some point that you really
Yes.
value that helped shape you as an individual. Like we often say, hey, think about an important, influential, or even transformational educator you've had in your life, right?
Mm.
And how much of a difference that person made in your life. And we try to encourage UCLA students to think of themselves as you could be that person in the life
Yeah.
of a child, Um, but, we're doing the best we can. And this is where some interesting stuff have come out. I know you know all this, so forgive me if I'm repeating things
No,
maybe
no, no,
some of
no.
your other guests have said, but
Mhm.
there's been a lot of like innovation in terms of what's called asynchronous teaching, which
Okay.
is creating lessons that are, um, there's synchronous teaching and asynchronous teaching. And we really didn't even use this terminology so much back in the day when you were studying education and arts education, because it wasn't as necessary. But
Yeah.
synchronous is when you're kind of showing up in the classroom with the kids right there, and it's all happening in real time in a real space. 40 minutes is 40 minutes, or 1 hour is 1 hour. But asynchronous is actually pre-recording your lessons. So it
Mm.
almost looks and feels a little bit like YouTube tutorials or something.
Okay.
It still takes a lot of design and a lot of thought, really gathering the materials you need, the space you need, thinking about your lighting, thinking about how you're going to shoot it, maybe the editing process. But a lot of our students have gotten very good at sort of designing lessons, shooting them, editing them, and then the implementation phase is what's actually changed. So the students are, providing those lessons to classroom teachers that really want their students to continue to, uh, you know, learn the arts, but maybe they could do it in a way where it fits into their schedule rather than fitting into the UCLA student schedule, you know.
Mm.
So basically you had to teach your classes and squeeze it into a time frame where it fit in with your other classes, right? And
Yeah.
you probably hustled over to these schools to sort of do your thing, and then you hustled back to UCLA.
Yes.
Well, now that part's easier. Also, I got to tell you, there's a dance educator. His name is Nick. Shout out to Nick. But he's just one of many that I'm so interested in their process. But he's doing all of his UCLA classes, finishing up his dance degree, and doing his student teaching at East LA Performing Arts Magnet. But he's in San Francisco, so he's not even in LA.
Wow.
But he's showing up on Zoom, and trying to connect with the students that way. And maybe the first class, some students were, uh, it really depends. Some students don't turn their camera on, maybe because they have
Yeah.
an accommodation that allows them to keep their camera off, or maybe they're just very
Yeah.
super self-conscious, or maybe
Yeah.
you know they're they're in a space where they don't have a private space to sort of
Yeah.
do their classroom, or there's no quiet space. And so there's a lot of adjustments we've had to make, but each class kind of gets better. So there's a combo deal already, like a mixed modality of offering lessons that could be taught when a student and a teacher can fit it into their schedule, but also showing up into the Zoom classroom and doing your best. I kind of joke with some colleagues, but I teach a lot of Zoom classes these days, and it always feels like I just, hosted a children's TV show or something. It's like super, like it's super big performance of
Yes.
teaching to try to
Yes.
get the students to, and this is UCLA too. Like you feel like you
Mm.
just did something like, I guess what I want to say is teaching is always performative. There's always something that switches in that's a little bit like performance energy,
Yeah.
like when
Absolutely.
we teach, we're not usually like just mellow and relaxed. There's
Yeah.
something like there's an energy that kind of
There is. Yeah.
heightens the experience. But when you're trying to like break through the screen, uh, and create a 3D experience
Mm.
in different, in a different way, I think some students are really, really impressing uh, themselves first. Like, hey, I did that thing that I didn't know I could do. And the last thing I'll say, Kevin, that kind of, this is maybe a downer, but I actually feel, quite sympathetic and empathetic to students who are, UCLA students, for instance, last spring, and that was
Yeah.
their last quarter. UCLA is on a quarter system, but
Yes.
either quarter or semester, depending on your school. But like everything that is like beautiful about the last couple months of your college education and your college experience, and all the, senior projects, or all of the student organized performances, or dance, music, theater presentations, let alone, you know, culminations, and, think about how
Yeah.
important that part of it was, or how the kind of community you were creating when you're on campus together. Those things,
Mm.
I feel like, a lot of students who are currently attending college, they, many of them have really good attitude about, but it kind of just sucks. What can I say? Like, you don't get to experience not just like the learning, but just the fun, the energy, the,
Yeah.
like the sharing. Like, I don't know what your experiences are. I don't need to hear all the dirty secrets, but like, but like something happens, like your senior year, your final year, you
Yeah.
figured out so much stuff. You're on your path. You're, you're producing and you're putting things out there. And it's
Yeah.
just a shame that these students, currently don't have the same experiences that maybe you did or your peers did.
Yeah, it is a huge adjustment. And I share the same sentiments as you. I do feel extremely bad and I really do sympathize with them. But I know that they're in good hands. And I think everyone's just kind of making the best of their situation,
Yeah.
whether you are in school or not. I did want to ask you, Kevin, you've kind of brought up on several occasions earlier, from what I've heard, is that, everyone's kind of adjusting as well as they can. And I don't know if maybe if you can talk about, and you kind of just said like breaking the screen and trying to speak to the kids through like, this kind of fourth wall, right? That kind of separates us. If you can maybe just talk about like some ways that, or some new tactics you've done to like re-engage your students even more that you weren't doing pre-COVID. So maybe some adjustments you've done that you found that have worked at least via Zoom. And you're like, okay, like this is a new teaching style that I can kind of incorporate to kind of get the kids' attention and make them want
Yeah.
to work over Zoom.
Well, that, that's actually what we're doing now in VAPA that maybe is so different than what we did when in your day, which was not too long ago.
Yeah.
That's how fast this has all changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, what can I say? Well, I try to simulate as much um, of what would be happening in a real classroom as possible. So these are just small things, but um, the topic of social emotional learning arts has become much more important to the training of teachers, and I think it permeates throughout all different sectors. But
Hmm.
there's a lot of things that can happen in a classroom where we're making sure that um, the emotional well-being of the students are being addressed in ways, and
Mm,
so just a lot of its technological challenges are overcome, though there's still students that struggle every day with Wi-Fi. What am I saying? Like, I was teaching a class a couple of weeks ago, and out of nowhere, with no warning, how you get like a little Zoom message like your internet is unstable or
yeah.
your Wi-Fi is I had no warning, and out of nowhere it was just like bam, done. So like, what?
Oh.
Then you have to restart Zoom and hope
Mm,
kids show up again. But my point is just
yeah.
the check-in, and I don't know if you do this in your own teaching, but like,
Mm.
I don't get right to work exactly,
No, yeah,
but
same,
or
same, same, same.
I think about the work differently, which is like, hey, let me just check in with each and every student, and I
Yes.
say their name out loud. Hey, let me hear you. Are you there? How you doing today? How you feeling? Like, it's not that I didn't do that, but especially around like production time for those
Mhm.
of your followers who are
Yeah.
creatives, they may understand like the pressure right before you're putting something out in the world. It gets really intense. It's like, hey, we don't have time for talk. We got to get right to work. Boom, boom, boom. Let's run it again, run it again. Like
Yeah.
now I'm backing off of some of the intensity of the process of
Mhm.
creative process, and understanding that the social process and the emotional process are equal to like the artistic goals, right? Like, if
Mhm.
I feel like that's a slight change, but I think really worth mentioning, with which is that, you know, um, I want to check in with them, and I want to make sure they're doing okay. And even if they're not feeling, super comfortable to like share their whole life story with you,
Yeah.
or, to like, they at least know that, maybe they, you know, that adults in their lives are thinking about them. And then I'll
Yes.
try to really remember something that they said the week before and like bring it back. Like, it's a really active listening job at this point, which is to really pay attention to what either students shared or talked about. I start every class with like some kind of music jam. And sometimes it just creates a little, ambiance before the students come in. But then
Yeah.
I started like asking, are there any DJs in the room? How many of you have been singing? Do you want to suggest any songs? So really engaging people like in the Zoom,
Mm.
like even the kids who, are a little bit in their shell might be, you know, open to like putting some things in the chat, really creating like positivity in that chat, that
Yes.
Zoom chat. Whereas,
Yes.
whereas before, I don't think it was so much my emphasis in my teaching to make sure I was checking in on the students so frequently, and
Hmm.
also really giving them a chance to sort of give each other support. And that chat function, can really be helpful that way. What else is helpful? You know what? This is like simulating a thing, but there's something in teaching called a pair share where you're like, hey, turn to your neighbor and, talk
Hmm.
about this question. Like what are some things, I don't even know what the question might be, but like
Yeah.
share it with your neighbor and then maybe share it out, whatever. So that's where breakout rooms, I don't know if you're using those in
Mm,
your own teaching, if you're doing like in
not right
dance or
now.
whatever, but when you're doing collaboration, it can always start with conversation, you
Mm,
know, and conversation and dialogue is part of the creative process. And then it
yes.
is part of the artistic training. Whereas before, I think a lot of us felt like we got to get to work.
Yeah.
My job here is to teach you some skills, some techniques. The, my job is to make you the best singer you could be, the best dancer you could be, the best painter you could be.
Yeah.
And now I feel like we're really sensitive and empathetic to the human condition, which of course artists, uh, you know, maybe always could be and should be. But I think I'm
Yeah.
really giving time for that. I hope that answered your question because it sounds like we're not accomplishing anything other than feeling good in our hearts. But
No, that's important.
once they feel good, then they're more likely to like turn on their camera if they have their camera off. And I've seen this happen quite a lot, um, or really, I'm really big. My work is very collaborative. I really believe in theories and practices of ensemble building,
Yeah.
community building. I'm not so much interested anymore, though I think in the beginning of my career I kind of was. And maybe this is maybe where some of your followers are at, which is that, you know, how do you kind of make a name for yourself as a teacher?
Mm,
As an educator, as an artist, as an influencer, as someone who's
yeah.
sort of trying to find your own path out of undergrad. And I've had
Hmm.
a lot of different, iterations of myself. It took me decades to get to where I'm at. And so I
Hmm.
found what works best for me. But I feel like if I can nurture the human spirit, the creative spirit, the social spirit of a student, it's not as interesting or important for me to make sure that they are um, the world's greatest artist at that particular art form. But
Yeah.
really, the goal for me is to think of themselves as, a creative human being, worthy of, um, worthy of uh, attention, validation, celebration. Everyone's story matters.
Yeah.
Everyone's journey matters. I mean, choreographically, the metaphor of the journey
Mm,
is so interesting for me right now. So that I'm not, I mean, I'm super impressed by dancers that have like complete perfect unison. Do you know what I mean? But I'm equally interested in like getting to know each dancer and
yeah.
spending time with them on stage or on screen in a different way. I love
Yes.
seeing different body types. I love seeing different ages, shapes, sizes, colors. So even though maybe the idea is unison, I'm actually interested in what makes people unique within an ensemble.
Mm,
Honestly, I'd
absolutely.
love to hear from more, choreographers and dance makers at this point, like where their heads at with that. But I just feel like the last couple of years have really taught me to like really value the individuality of all my students at the
Mm.
same time exploring their commonality through the arts practice we're working on.
Well, you mentioned it earlier, Kevin, and it's kind of funny, but this is how our journey in terms of knowing about and meeting each other started. But you were actually one of the two staff that was in my audition room at UCLA, and I remember you even reached out to me in the summer, maybe a month or two before school started, even just checking in and introducing yourself. And I always felt like very warm welcome. Obviously, like 17, 18-year-old high schooler going
Yeah.
into a university, it was just one of those things that also made it be like, okay, like some familiarity, some support, like, oh, like that's really awesome. Like he remembered me. Like that's so amazing. And I want to just do a quick aside here, Kevin, because I think there's not gonna ever be a better time to say this, but I remember creating for my piece specifically for UCLA because I had done, UCI, I'd done Cal Arts, and there was so many others I don't really remember at this time. But I remember taking the Amtrak up north to from San Diego, where I live, to LA, and I remember trying to create the piece for the audition
Mhm.
like 2 days the night before. And I remember like for some reason I struggled so much because UCLA was the dream school. It was like I maybe kind of putting a little too much pressure on myself. And I remember I knew that I knew the song I wanted to do, and I knew that I wanted to do like lyrical contemporary because I never wanted to be pigeonholed into being like you can only do hip hop or you can only do X,
Mhm.
Y, and Z. And I remember there was only one part in the music that I knew I wanted to do something. And I remember everything else was like a guided improv. So for my audition, it was actually like I had listened to the song tens and thousands of times. It was a song for you by Christina Aguilera's her version, but I just remember being like, you
Oh.
know what, I'm gonna go into this. Just I'm just gonna channel the emotion and just like try to. Hopefully, the staff can feel like how much I want this, rather than just like choreographing it and like making it like look clean. So I remember I had like a completely just like, all right, just YOLO. I'm gonna just do it like this, and I don't know. I just remember it was just so memorable seeing you in that room. And then obviously you had reached out to me a couple months later. And then there was just always a connection. And like you said, even post grad and, teaching when I was still teaching, at uni high school and post grad from UCLA, like we were always in constant communication. So there's just so much connection and history there that I wanted to kind of clarify that. I know that there's people in the audience that have went to UCLA that listen to this. So just for them to know, but that's just kind of going back to our history. And I've always felt that you've always connected and you've always made me feel comfortable, and you've always just supported me. And I've always really appreciated that. And I feel like that's something that goes very like kind of under the radar for like a really great teacher or a mentor. In your
Yeah.
case, just like an older figure that really just has always looked out for my best interests. So I just want to say thank you for that. I wanted to get that out there because it means a lot to me, and it's helped me get to places in my life. I just wanted to say that to you. Take the time.
Thank you. You know, at this point in my career, those kinds of things really keep me going. Got a little touched up here in the mic. I got me. I can't, but Kevin, I'll be honest. I don't remember every single student that ever auditioned for the dance program that I was part of, or
Yeah.
every student that I ever taught. Especially as I get older, I'm teaching more and more. At this point, it's easily 1,000 students that I've ever taught. But
Yeah.
I do have a capacity, I will say, that maybe not every teacher has. You know, some teachers can just drop in knowledge that changes some kid's mind, like boom, and it
Yeah.
changes their whole life. I'm not saying I'm not capable of that, whatever. Maybe
Yeah.
on occasion, I can muster something that feels profound like that. But
Yeah.
I think my approach really has been more on a personal level. And I remember
Yeah.
you, I remember your audition, I remember and I would say that's true of many, many other students, and not just at UCLA. It goes all the way back to my LAUSD public school teaching. Is that some students come into your life. This might be true for you as well. Um, and then they move on, like you're just part of them getting to the next place in some way. But
Yeah.
others really, like, really, you create some real moments between each other. And I was lucky enough to be able to do that with a special kid like you.
Mm.
I do remember your audition, and it's interesting because I can almost picture how much uh, you really cared. You were really focused. You were really like, um, I didn't know it was like your number one school, but I could kind of tell. And actually, one of the things I almost wanted to say to you, and I would still say to any student, which is like, hey, just trust your process, trust
Mm.
enjoy the moment. Whatever happens after this is out of your control. Do the best you can,
Yeah.
believe in yourself, believe in the music, believe in the choices you made, believe in the choreography that you're going to do, connect to this minute. I don't know how they don't
It's
even
a
give you
minute and
that
a half
much
or
time
so.
to
Yeah.
dance.
I don't
It's
even
so
know.
short. And then there's a stack of other things like your letters of recommendation and your test scores and things like that. But like
Yeah.
I just always felt like UCLA has increasingly gotten more, maybe this, more and more difficult to kind of get
Yeah.
accepted to. Like I think
Yeah.
it's the number one public university in terms of applicants. Like there's just so many
Yes.
applicants.
That for sure.
And there
Yes.
used to, I don't know at this point what these kids' GPA is.
Yeah.
I basically want to say, wow, how in the world did you get a 4.5? Like, what is that? On the other
Yeah.
hand, I want to say, you know, you are so much more than that number on that paper. You are
Yeah.
so much more. I'm excited to get to know you beyond what even a
Mm,
4.5 means. Like
yeah.
that's the kind of thing I want to, sort of, if I can as a teacher, just sort of like helps people see their full value and not just the value that they have like on paper. And I think our society has really, overemphasized, and maybe the pendulum is swinging a little bit in the other direction, but overemphasized what our SAT scores are, what our ACT
Hmm.
scores are, what our GPAs are. That is so, just minimal part of who we are, right?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of us figured out the hustle you need to make or to kind of maybe go into higher education, but there's tons of amazing artists, dancers, scholars, thinkers, creators,
Yeah.
that on paper, look average, and they're anything but average. They're like way
Mm,
more than average. And so,
absolutely.
actually, literally, what I wanted to tell you is I knew you were really capable and special even before you started dancing, just because I could see the way, like, oh, this kid is coming. He's coming, you know, he's coming with the right, intention, which is that, he really has something to share. I can see it. He wants to share something. Let me lean in and see what it is he's trying to say. And then, cut to 10 years later, here we are.
Here we are, and we're that's the
Yeah.
amazing thing is, I always say that just the tuition was, it's obviously a hell of a lot, but I think the honestly, and that's actually real, but the
Yeah.
connections that are everlasting and the friends that I've made and the networks, especially from the professors and the mentors that I've had, um, makes it all worth it. It truly does, because you experience, like, at that time of, like, you're 18 to 22. I mean, you go through a lot of growth and moving away from home for the first time and being independent and learning how to
Yeah.
time manage and learning how to figure out what you want to do with your life is, and having all that support, especially like at a community like UCLA, was so incredibly profound on my life, and it was worth it. And you're obviously one of those people who's had a huge impact, and I just want to take that time to say that, Kevin. And I wanted to, don't think that I forgot, but I definitely want to get into you because you have a very, 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 very profound resume and just everything you've done. And I first even want to start, Kevin, first of all, just a little bit on what it was like for you growing up, if you can, whatever you feel like you can share with us. And then two, maybe even how you got interested in the arts and then in education in the first place. So like where that journey even started. So what it was like growing up, and then how the arts and education came into your life.
Mm. Well, that's a long story. You're right. It goes back many years at this point, but let me see if I can make it succinct in some way. Um, I think I was a super creative kid, if I could be, really honest about it, reflecting. And yet I, grew up in a family that was struggling in its own way. And I
Mm,
think we were taken care of, but it was really hard for my parents. I'm from, you know, a family that was really working just to survive.
yeah.
You know, um, and this is common to other students I've met over the years, which is why I think I've had such kind of an affinity and an empathy for so
Mm,
many of my students. But
yes.
growing up in poverty, growing up
Hmm.
with issues like addiction and you know um, I don't want to throw my family under the bus. They're so important to me, but they were just figuring stuff out. Immigrant
Mm,
families, low
yeah.
socioeconomic families,
Yeah.
uh, people that are working all the time, people that are like, I'm not saying the kids get ignored, but I think some ways my creative spirit wasn't nurtured, or at least I don't recall it being nurtured. There was no one in my family that had ever gone to college, so I would almost
Yeah.
say even my academic sort of, um, as long as you were a good enough kid and didn't get into trouble, then they were just like, okay, this one's okay. Let's focus on, the
Yeah.
next one. So in some ways I had a really strong sort of, you know, self-directed and, I would say even like creative fantasy life, dance. I mean, just like so many kids, I didn't have access to dance lessons or whatever, but like
Yeah.
singing into my hairbrush. I loved to sing. I had some influential teachers along the way. I'll never forget, in second grade, one of my teachers gave me my first guitar, and she
Wow.
taught us how to play. I mean, yeah, because when you come from like a family that really struggles economically, like
Yeah.
things like dance lessons or even instruments or music, like those are all extras. Like
Yeah.
these are things we
Mm-hmm.
just don't, like we're lucky we got, our dinner
Yeah. Yeah.
some during some parts of our life, right?
Yes.
You know, I know what it's like to like drive in a car where there's too many people crammed in the car and it's a crappy car. You don't even know if it's going to be able to get like from A to B, um, or, being worried that the electricity or the, whatever's going to be turned off. Like those are some formative memories for me. But I think a lot of artists can relate to sort of like facing challenges and adversity and, creating something beautiful out of it. And I would say
Absolutely.
definitely there's some seminal important teachers in my life that sort of picked me out as someone who had potential. Um, I really benefited from scholarships. My first formal
Mm.
scholarship, I think, was maybe I was 14 years old
Yes.
and maybe benefited from a ballet scholarship. I mean, I kind of knew what ballet was just from watching TV or something, but
Yeah.
I like didn't know. Let me
You're
put
like,
it this way.
oh.
I don't even think I went to a museum until I was in college. You know what I
Mm.
mean? Like we
Yeah.
weren't a
Yeah.
family that didn't, I would say understand or prescribe to like high art. The music I understood was the music that was played, and this is true of a lot of immigrant families. The music that was played and sung at family parties, the dancing that was done in backyards. Like I understood
Yeah.
another way that the arts were alive in my life, but I
Mm.
didn't have any training, and those weren't art forms that were necessarily valued in the society or at least in the communities that I grew up in. So
Yeah.
I'm from an Irish background. If any of your followers or
Yeah.
any Irish people, like we sing, we tell stories. I think I have a very like beautiful voice for Irish songs just from like
Mm.
thinking about the ways that like my relatives and family. So it was not like, the worst childhood in the world, but there weren't a lot of opportunities to train. So some of that was self-motivated and some of it was impacted by, you know, but I think I tell this story and I'll tell it really quickly.
Yeah.
When I got that ballet scholarship, I think so much of that had to do with the fact that I was a tall, skinny kid. And I remember them looking at my foot. I don't know if you have any dancers that will be listening to this,
Oh
but like
yeah. Yeah.
there used to be like this real value for like a foot that you can arch your foot,
Yeah. Like a really good point. Like a really good
like
point. Yeah.
point your toes. And I remember the teachers being like, "Oh wow, look at his foot." Like basically, my value was like focused
Yeah.
on one part of my body. And
Mm-hmm.
I've often thought, wow, what would it have been like if I was and being a male who wanted to dance already, you have like a foot in the door because
Yeah. This is so
they were
scarce. Yeah.
they were open to it. But I often wonder what it would have been like if I had been short, chubby, flat-footed. I don't know. I don't think I wouldn't have got that first ballet scholarship, which
Yeah.
then wouldn't have led to other opportunities that led to other opportunities that led to other opportunities. And it's that randomness, Kevin, that I never liked as I got older. When I became a teacher
Mm.
at Marshall High School, I met so many, I mean, truly brilliantly talented, hysterical, creative, caring, kind, beautiful kids that had very little, if any, arts training or formal training. But a
Yeah.
lot of them could dance, a lot of them could sing, a lot of them. And again, a lot of that came from like quinceañera culture or like debut culture. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There was arts going on in my
Yeah.
communities, karaoke, like there were things going
Uh-huh.
on, but they weren't like, hey, we went to like Miss Tanya's dance studio. It wasn't that. And I just felt like I want to be part of the initiative or the movement that makes arts education available to all kids. You shouldn't just have the luck of having an arched foot or an influential teacher or a school that has a good arts program, depending on what zip code you grow up in. And
Mm.
so I feel like a lot of my opportunities came sort of in kind of a stroke of good luck.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't want it to have to be so lucky for kids to have access to the arts. And by the way, the arts is so much about learning how to be a human being in the world, learning how the world works, not only to understand the world, but also to critique the world. You have to know what it is. You have to have a voice. Literally, your voice is a metaphor. I'm not just talking, you have to learn how to sing, but learning how to sing will help you learn how to make some noise in the world, right?
Mm,
And making some noise in the world will make a change in the world. And that's how I feel about, arts education. So I just became, it's a long journey to get there.
yeah.
I'm like the first people, I had a couple cousins exactly my age. That also, I don't know if you understand Irish Catholic culture, but like I had hundreds of cousins. Like my mother's the youngest of 12. So
Wow.
if they all had all these kids and those kids all
Hmm.
had all these kids, like we have a lot of kids. But I was among the first graduating class of high school. I had four cousins exactly my age, and we all went to college. So literally, we were the first in our families to go to college. I don't know how I ended up becoming a professional artist, performing artist, then going to get an MFA in dance and then a
Yeah.
PhD. Like
Uh-huh.
it's like this is totally by accident, but those are my degrees over there on my shoulder right there.
Yeah, you got to have them up. It's a good reminder,
For sure.
especially during this
But
time.
yeah. But anyway, I just think about a lot of that, which is not only my good fortune, my good luck. To be honest, I want to own it. Like a lot of self-direction, a lot of self-motivation. To be very honest, for those of us who grew up in houses afflicted by addiction, so
Mm.
much of it was about trying to get out and get beyond and get above my circumstances. And I felt like school was okay. I can get out of this situation as long as I get to college. For me, somehow I thought getting to college meant I'll have a successful life. It's so much more complicated than that, I know.
Yeah.
But my little brain was just thinking like, I want I want a good life for myself. And somehow, the arts was a part of the structure
Mm,
and the mechanism and the tool to create that. And then I would be really remiss if I didn't also not only mention the teachers, but mention the friends I made. I
mm.
so relate to like the friends I made in my theater. I did a lot of musical theater. So
Yes.
every time you're in a show, like you create these small little families, and then some of them stick with you the rest of your life. I'm here to tell you, I have friends that I've had for 40 years that I met when I was like in middle school. So it's the arts not only kind of gave me direction academically, but it certainly gave me a foundation socially to like have really close friendships that I'm lucky enough to have to this day. So I hope that helps answer your question a little bit, because it's a complicated story, but I want every kid to have the option for those kinds of experiences.
Absolutely. And we're gonna do a little showboating for you here, Kevin. So I'm just gonna
Yeah.
kind of read off some things that I had written down and make sure that we included this in here. But Kevin, your resume is very accomplished and you have so much. And I'm gonna get to a question at the very end. But I mean, a PhD in cultural studies with an emphasis in arts education from Claremont Graduate University, an MFA in dance choreography from World Arts and Cultures, UCLA, the WAC department, World Arts and Cultures and Dance. You
Yeah.
designed and directed the award-winning high school dance theater intensive program, which is taking place from 2006 to 2013, I believe, correct?
Well, I was director during those years, but
There
then
you go.
it passed on to people who actually attended the program. Some of whom attended the program when they were in high school. So a lot of it is like
Mhm.
creating space for new leadership to happen, and in that program, I'm really proud of. Yeah,
Absolutely. You're also a former credentialed language arts teacher, which you did just recently just say that right now in the
yeah,
LA Unified School District. You
yep,
taught theater arts and dance for 8 years at John Marshall High School, and you
yep.
created numerous original dance theater productions in collaboration with many students. And of course, along with your childhood friend Monica Horan Rosenthal, you co-founded and served as executive director for the Flourish Foundation from 2005 2014. So the
Yeah.
reason why I say all just some of your accomplishments, Kevin, is you do all these things and you spearhead a lot of these amazing spaces that have ultimately cultivated these artists and kids. I mean, you're so accomplished and you have all this knowledge and experience from your life and these different spaces. I mean, what ultimately made you just decide to even to give back? I mean, all these programs are kind of, it's always about giving back. It's always to the next generation. How can you further this craft that has given you a life and you love so much? Like, what made you decide, like, you know what, it's all about giving back?
Wow. Um, yeah, I think when you frame it that way, there is definitely, an element to my career, which is about creating opportunities for access points, entry points maybe because I benefited so much from those entry points myself, opportunities to develop skills and techniques, but also friendships, confidence. Um, there's so many facets of my story that we didn't have time to get to today, but really making sure that there's safe spaces for kids, creative spaces, spaces
Mm-hmm.
where, marginalized kids can feel like they're part of um, the center of the experience, and not, you know, I think so many of those things inspired me. I guess to answer your question, I feel like maybe it was a career built on gratitude.
Mm.
Gratitude for my own opportunities and the people who provided them, and gratitude for whatever kind of um, privilege and power I was able to either build for myself or was given, by society, and really making sure that um, lots of different kinds of kids from all different kinds of backgrounds and all different kinds of neighborhoods have the same opportunities. And it feels like me giving, but clearly it's also reciprocal.
Mm.
I keep receiving.
Yeah.
And so I'm glad you can relate to that. Like every time we give, we get something back that just feeds us to give more. And hopefully, seeing young people grow up into healthy adults, um, a lot of them educators, a lot of them giving in their own way, teaching, the phrase each one teach one, or creating space for new leadership to develop really takes like mentorship that I feel like is more than just like a one-off. It can't just be one experience. So I've always been interested in like, okay, well, what's the next experience, or what's the next project that can help that student continue to develop. I think
Mm.
maybe our relationship is one model for that, which is
Yeah.
stay in touch with your students, when it's appropriate to sort of
Yeah.
see how they're doing, and then also be available to them when they reach out to you. Um, and I guess part of that, kind of all goes back to, that's, like I said, the gratitude I have for, the opportunities that came my way to imagine a life. I had a dream of a life when I was a child, but I didn't know what that would look like. Along the way, I would never necessarily have been able to like tell you the story. What you just described there, some of it was really random for me, like
Yeah.
making this choice, taking this road instead of that road. I really, in my 20s, was interested in being a professional performer and an actor and a
Yeah.
dancer and a singer. And I really leaned into that. I really like worked hard at that. And little did I know that that set me up for all the kind of skills I would need to navigate um, teaching, higher education, starting a nonprofit, directing a very revolutionary arts ed program, like all of the things I did kind of brought me to this place. And now I'm really, excited by the younger people.
Yeah.
Because even like you, the younger people are not so young anymore.
Don't remind me. Don't remind me.
So the younger people I know who are now have come into their own as adults, I just think that's what inspires me.
Mm.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. Kevin, you've only just, we've only had time to just give a surface level of, your narrative and your journey and how you've navigated. And I think specifically with you being, so many things and, obviously just an educator and an arts educator at heart, it's always just been a huge part of you. I know a lot of people that are even thinking about pursuing the arts, there's a lot of just hesitancies. It's a really difficult time. And I think that, this space is all about connecting with people that have really had an impact on my life, and how have they maneuvered through their life, and how can us as listeners, how can we apply some of those great things to our lives. Now, this wouldn't change anything in the world, Kevin, but if you could say anything to your 13-year-old self, what would you say?
Yeah. I mean, that's such a common question that I interestingly don't know that I've ever asked myself. You know, at that point, I was pretty fragile and pretty shy. I think I was being, honestly, if I may tell the truth, I think I was being kind of bullied on a regular
Mm,
basis at school. So much of it, um, and I think a lot of that still happens, and I mean, a lot of it happens on social media, whatever. But I would really like kind of want to say, the obvious is it's going to get better. You're not going to be this 13-year-old target for, like, name calling and abuse. And a lot of queer kids have experienced very similar kinds of things. So in some ways I would really want to like encourage that young kid to kind of stay strong and keep believing in themselves. This is something I haven't really said out loud, but I've thought about a lot. But also I would encourage that person to like stand up for themselves more, and don't believe what some folks believe of me, but actually fight back. And I don't mean physically fight back, but really fight to like own my place in this classroom, or like really hold on to like my value and not give it up so easily. um, I think that's important. I'm really going to think more about what I mean by that. But there
yeah.
was something about, um, you know, working working on my self-esteem that took a lot of years, and I really wish there was maybe someone at that age that would just, remind me of my value and my worth and my potential. And again, I think that goes right back to what you just said. Why are some of the choices I made in my career? It might really be to take care of that 13-year-old kid that
Mm,
is not believing in themselves, or is being the target of bullying, or is facing a lot of challenges in their home, or like I really want to maybe go back to that 13-year-old kid all the time, and like help them stay strong, keep believing in themselves. And I
absolutely.
think maybe it starts with me going back to myself. Like you said,
Mm,
what would you say to that student? And maybe on some level, every time I talk to a ninth grader, I'm talking to myself anyway.
mm, that's huge. Kevin, I just, especially that last bit, I just want to say thank you for being so transparent and giving us your time and your energy today. And I
Sure.
think, you've played a huge role in my life, and I have so much love for you. And I know that you have so many things going on. I'm just so happy that you're able to, spare some time today to come on with us and to share your narrative and to just you share your knowledge with the audience and whoever's tuning in. And hopefully we can do a checkup sometime in the future. That's kind of something that I'm planning to do with all the guests that I've had. I'm definitely, like I told you pre-recording, that I'm trying to get that first year's worth of content and then obviously check back in when things are right. So hopefully, when we get to check back in, things will be a little bit different in the world in terms of like positively, and we'll be able to be back in the classroom safely and responsibly. But until then, Kevin, I'm always here for you. And I just want to say thank you so much. And I hope you had a good time, Kevin. I really hope you had a
Yeah,
good
it was
time.
it was wonderful speaking with you, Kevin. And it's right back at you. Thank you for all you're doing, um, putting stories like mine and many other people out there, and maybe kind of helps other people feel like something they can relate to, or something they can connect with, or maybe inspire them. Um, and you're doing the same thing. So right back at you. I look forward to seeing you in real life again, giving you a nice hug, and
Absolutely.
pick it up.
Looking forward to it, Kevin. Until then, take care and I'll see you soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kevin.